Hello, my name is Mike. In this video, I'll be walking you through my process for lighting an interior in Animation Master, using just a single light source. When creating any kind of art, the process is similar. We have a creative idea or concept we want to make into reality, but need to use creative problem solving to get results. In this demonstration, I will show you the steps I took and often the roadblocks needed to overcome to get to the final image. In Animation Master, I'll break down the steps I take to light an interior scene into clear, manageable parts, understanding the importance of model scale when using radiosity, exploring material properties and how they interact with light, creating a sunlight setup with volumetric fog, avoiding common light leaks in interior renders, setting up and comparing different radiosity solutions, finally, rendering an animation that's clean and flicker-free. By the end, you will see how all these elements come together to create realistic, beautifully lit interiors in Animation Master. Okay, so I'm just going to launch Animation Master. So as you can see here, I'm using version 19.5e. Just going to open up my model. So I've already modeled my chair and my room. Everything is to scale. Control P. I'm going to go to my units. You can see I got inches. And I have a highlight at every 12th line. Grid spacing of 1. So one of these squares is a foot with the inches in between. T to dolly around. M to move. As you can see, I just have a basic chair here with some basic textures, just a plastic and a chrome material. I got my room here. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.5 feet high by 12 by 12. So I just have some basic textures. It's a sealed room. There's the roof, the floor, the walls, and the only opening is this window here. So that's what we're going to create a choreography and put a light to have that single light source entering the room and bouncing light around. So let's go new choreography. Going to rotate it around here. You can see the Animation Master, it created a basic choreography. It built or created a few lights here. So we have a couple of sunlights, a spotlight, and a ground. And it placed it in this choreography. But we don't need this ground, so I'll just delete this. And let's see here. We don't need this fill light. And yeah. See, I'll just make this not active for the time being. And I'll use this key as our sun just to demonstrate lighting the scene. So I'm going to drag in my room into the choreography. I'm using the numeric keypad to change the room views. I use that to change the camera views. And then on the top of the keyboard, I press the 8 or the 9 or the 0 to change the shading of my objects. So side view, make sure it's on the ground. And just position stuff. I'm going to place my camera. Kind of want it looking over here. If I was to use a depth of field, this will be my focal plane. And press the 1 key to switch to camera view. And 9 for shaded. So we can see here, we got to change our focal length for camera. So let's see here, focal length. Just going to reduce this down a little bit. I'm actually going to change the dimensions. Let's see here, the resolution. Make it HD 720p. You can see here, this is our frame. But I want to invert things. I want it to be more like a portrait aspect. So I'm going to change this to 1280. And I think I'd rather have it 800 there. So I'm using my little mouse scroll wheel to zoom back in and out. And so I want to zoom back in, adjust my focal length. And when you press the T key and you hold down Shift, you can look around your room through your camera, position things. So that's pretty good. I'm just going to go back to the side view and just my height. Okay. That's pretty good. So now I want to adjust my light so that I have some light coming in. I want to have some light hitting the wall and a little bit hitting the floor, because I want to have the light bouncing, eventually casting photons, getting some of this color, bouncing it in here, some of the floor color bouncing up and illuminating our scene. So I'm going to switch back to my top view, grab my light, make sure everything's in position to be cast into the room. I want to increase, see here, width fall off. So I want to have more fall off so that the light reaches within the room. There we go. And going in that direction, go back to a top view. Make sure it's going to go through that window there. Go back to camera view. And then let's take a look at a render preview of what the lighting is doing. So when I'm setting up lights, I like to use this render lock. It's Shift Q. And then just right mouse click, draw a region. So you notice here there's no shadows cast. We have to make some adjustments to the settings of the light here. So we got our diffuse on, our specularity on, make sure our shadows are cast. Okay, and then I'm going to increase the darkness. The default is always 80, but I always like to set it to 100. And then increase the rays. And now we're starting to get the way we would expect a light to cast within a room. You know, we just want a single light, shadows, and a light source, and the rest would be dark if there was no radiosity. So let's see here. I'm going to adjust the coloring of my sun, make it something warm. Get a bit more of that morning sunlight look to it. Increase the intensity. Starting to get a bit more. Maybe I'll drop the width down. The width is having an effect how soft this shadow is. So let's see here. About half of that. Increase my rays. And now we can start adjusting the positioning or the rotation of the light, because we want to move it down. We want to capture a little bit of the chair and a bit of the floor. So I can go here, just my rotation on the x-axis. So rotate it down. Okay. And then let's see here. We want to rotate it on the Y. There we go. rotate it down a little bit more on the X. And just get a bit of that, a bit of the wall, a bit of the floor, casting a bit of shadow from the chair. There we go. So this is the advantage of using this render lock mode. It's like a quick ray traced version. You know, it's kind of rough, but you don't want to have to do a render preview for every time you make an adjustment. That would just take too long to move, render. So this is close to real time, so we can set lighting up pretty quickly this way. Okay, so I'm going to cancel out of this here. And I just want to take a look at some of the settings in my camera. Go to render options. And whenever I'm rendering animations or projects, I prefer the look of the multipass renderer. So turn this on, and 16 passes is fine. Make sure your quality is on final. And then go through here and we just dial some of these settings. Make sure shadows are on, reflections. I'll set the level to 1. We don't need to calculate any more reflection information than we need to. You know, anything more than 1, it's just going to take longer to calculate. I do want some soft, because I'm going to introduce some soft reflections on the wood. But I'll reduce the quality to 20%, because the multi-passes as it's rendering will help soften things out. So that's pretty much it. Do a Q render, just kind of get a peek at the multi-pass render. And so as you see, with every pass, it's softening the shadows. These are ray trace shadows. So you can see we could even reduce the width a little bit to get a little bit sharper detail if we like. So the width, let's see here, be half of that. Just do a little preview here. See, a little bit too much. Maybe half of that. 6. There we go. So we have our sunlight in the room, but I want to show you something. If we go over to choreography and radiosity, turn this on, just say turn off the final gather. We don't want to look at that right now. We just want to cast some radiosity with some photons. Yeah. And we do our Q, do a little render here. You'll notice here that it calculated radiosity, but it's still rendering the same illumination. You just have our light and the same dark scene. And that's because sunlights do not cast photons. So what we need to do is we need to switch our sunlight to a spotlight. So even though we used the sun and we positioned everything, we can just switch to this light here. Basically in a choreography, all of these items are just referencing objects. So at least we have the spotlight here. So let's see here. I'll get rid of this one. That was the original reference. We just want to use this one here. It has all our settings, the intensity, the coloring. Let's look at our options here. Cast shadows. The default is Z buffered. I'll just put it back to ray tracing and make sure it's at 100%. Turn on the specularity. And let's see here. We got our photons cast, radiosity, and let's see what it does here. So there we go. So we can see that our spotlight is actually casting photons because it's created these little specks. So again, we will have to do a bit more adjustments to get the lighting cast where we want it to be. But I just wanted to show you as an example that if you're going to light a room or a scene and you want to use radiosity, the sunlight is not going to work for you. You have to use a spotlight or a bulb light. So let's reposition our light now that we have a spotlight in place. Let's see here, we just do Shift Q to do a ray trace preview. And we can go back and start positioning our light. Go to our rotation. Let's see here, let's try our X rotation. Bring it down. Okay, and now we see we're having an issue. And what's happening here, just cancel out, go to a top view. So go to the side view. You can see we have a fall off of our light. And this is the issue with when using spotlights, is that there's more fall offs to deal with. See, we have to make a sharper softness. This here, reposition it. It's ideal to have the whole room within the cone. This here, 7. The other thing is that because we are using a spotlight, the light is emanating from one position, and it's looking a little bit less like a sun and more like a lamplight. So what I'd like to do in that case is move it further back. See here. And then we can extend our fall off. And narrow our cone angle. It's here. And it's not exactly like the sun. You know, the sun rays are parallel, and we do have a bit of an angle here. But it's the best we can do, and it's going to give us our radiosity. Make sure your fall off is well past the room. We don't want the light to fade too quickly. So let's go back go back to our room, and let's see, Shift Q. Let's see what we're getting here. So yeah, so right away, I'm getting pretty close to what we had before. Get our light entering the room, getting a little bit of the chair and a bit of the floor here. Let's see. Okay, so I guess we'll stick to this here. I'll cancel that. And let's do a multipass render. Just hit the Q, and let's just see what it looks like. So that's pretty good. So I like using, most of the time I like using ray trace shadows. They do take a little bit more computational power to calculate when rendering, but they give you a lot more accuracy. The other thing you will notice if you're rendering an interior is that if you used Z-buffered shadows, that you can get more artifacts. See, even if I increase it to 1024 by 1024, and we do a render here, you see there's some light is leaking through here. And that has a lot to do with the bias of your shadows. But even if you drop it to the 0, but do a multipass render, you see you're always getting artifacts. You're getting fast calculations for shadows, but you're going to get these weird light leaking artifacts. So I definitely like to stick to ray trace shadows. You're going to get accuracy. and you get less artifacting. So, and then just say we wanted the shadows to be a little bit softer. There's a couple things we could do. We can change the width of the light. So it's at 6. So you can see right here. One way to do it is you can grab these little squares here, and you can scale up. And all that's doing is adjusting the width. So let's try 16. Go back to our camera view. Do a multipath render. And you can see by creating a larger width, the size of the light is casting a softer shadow. So you can, let's see here, I'm going to make a pretty soft looking here, 64 width. And then you'll notice there's a graininess, and the multipath is helping to smooth things, but this is directly a result of how many rays cast for the shadow. So you can increase that, and you should see less grainy shadows. The only issue is that the higher the rays cast for the shadows, the longer it takes to compute. So I do tend to keep it around 8, at the very most 16. But with multipass, you can see it's really smoothing things out. But I think the width dropped it down to 32. And let's see here. I do want to have some sharpness to the shadows. Yeah. So I like that. I like the effect you get. It's a more realistic shadow. If there are objects that are close to the ground, the shadows are sharper, and objects that are further away from the surface that are casting shadows, they're much softer. So that is much more realistic. Okay, now that we have our light set up and we like the positioning, let's create some volumetric fog. So let's see here. We'll go to volumetric, turn this on. Details. The default settings are pretty good. We'll just start with that. Do a Shift Q ray trace render, just to get an idea. Okay. Yes, it's working. Let's do multipass render. So again, this is where having multipass is good, because as you can see, the quality is a little bit rough, the first few layers that it renders, but over time it starts to smooth those results. So it looks like, I know that eventually we will make adjustments to this, because the room is so dark. This light looks like it's very bright. So in the time being, I'll drop down the brightness a little bit. So it's at 30. Let's see, do 16. Multipass render. I think as the room lights up, we will make some adjustments to the brightness later on. But for now, just to help us see some of these other objects, just dropped it down a little bit. Okay, so I want to make an adjustment to some of my materials. I want to just make the floor a little bit more reflective. So right now, yeah, we just have the light casting shadows. The chrome on the chair has some reflectivity, but it'd be nice to have this wood floor have a bit more of a shine to it. So I'm just going to maybe give it about 4%, 6%. Yeah, just so it has a little bit more visual interest. And it is looking soft because we did set our ray tracing to have some softness. So yeah, we just got a little bit here. It's just like a slightly polished wood. And I think it'll be more apparent once we get more light, but I just wanted to set those properties for the materials now. Okay, so let's start setting up our scene with some radiosity. So there's something to be said about when we start applying radiosity. I have had, in the past, I've had a few instances where I was getting rendering artifacts, just like weird lines rendering, things like that. And I think what it has to do with is the scale of the scene. So far this scene, everything is modeled to scale. This chair is about 3 feet high. The room is about 9.5 feet high, about 12 by 12. But I've had to scale down the room in the past significantly to not get rendering artifacts. I've had to scale it down to about 1 foot, 6 inches to 1 foot, around there. And that seemed to be a sweet spot for calculating radiosity, photons, final gather, and global illumination. But so far everything seems to be working okay. So I'll just show you my process for calculating radiosity. If you ever do have a problem, one of the things to try is the scaling everything down, and that should help. So anyway, we'll start with the default settings. We're going to turn off final gather. I find the radiosity settings, the photons cast area, and the final gathering settings. There's a lot of differences that happens between these settings. I find the final gather, it tends to brighten the radiosity. So then I have to reduce the intensity. But with photons cast, I need to increase the intensity if I'm not using final gather. So there's pros and cons to using each. But usually my process is to start with just casting photons. So I turn off final gather and I turn off pre-compute irradiance because I want to see the photons. I want to see what size I need to scale them at and what intensity they need to be at. So this is the default setting. I just do a multipass render and see what it gives me. So pretty much as expected, we get all these little bits of confetti. These are our photons. Again, the advantage of using a spotlight to emit photons is that all the photons are being cast in this direction. If you had a bulb light, just say this here was a bulb, it would be emitting photons in all directions, and that would be a waste of cast photons. We have 10,000 photons here. Only a small percentage of that 10,000 would be entering the room. But because we have a spotlight, we know that our 10,000 photons is being pushed in this direction. So now what we want to do is find the scale. Let's see here, the area, sample area. We want to see what size. Let's do a preview here. Okay, so our photons are getting larger, but they are still pretty small. So let's see, maybe I'll make it 800. And I'll just do a smaller render area, just so it renders faster. So we're starting to get the look that we're after, but they're still small. See, I'll double that, 1600. Okay, and it's starting to, it looks like we're getting some illumination, we're getting some bounces, but there's just not enough photons. So 10,000, see, I'll make it 100,000. Okay, we're starting to get the softness that we're after. There still is a little bit of splotchiness. The biggest issue is that it's too dark. So I'm going to increase the intensity. So try 200. Okay, maybe a little bit more brighter. We'll try 300. Okay, we're starting to get somewhere. We're getting some of this light bouncing, which as we would expect. Light's entering the room, bouncing around, and we're getting these like hot spots here that are bouncing off the wall. It's still looking a bit choppy. So I think I can try increasing the amount of photons. Try 200,000. See how this looks. But definitely getting a smoother result. And so what happens is we increase the amount of photons, we increase the size so that they become larger, and then the samples, when they are larger, the samples will blend them together much more. See, try 300 samples. So you can see this rendered region area here. The photons are starting to blend together a little bit more, but they still look a bit splotchy. I think the size could be much larger. So the sample area, I'll make it 2,000. Let's do a larger render for that. So it is looking a bit smoother. I think it could use more photons, more intensity. Let's see, 400, 400. $300,000, make this 24. So we're starting to get the result that we want. Definitely, I think this is a point where we definitely need more photons. And of course, it will take longer to render the more photons that we add. 300,000. Let's make this 500,000. Sample area 3. So we're getting something working here. You will find if you do scale your room down, your sample area numbers will be smaller. I think that is a contributing factor to helping your scene, because this is life size. My sample area is pretty large, and I probably should be pushing it even larger to help smooth out some of these splotchy areas. But besides that, so we're getting some light. We're getting our first pass of radiosity. The biggest issue that we're having is that there's a lot of light leaking that's happening through this window here. So there's a little bit of light coming through here, just a slight bit through that seam there, and then just so much bouncing around in this area here. So what we need to do is, this really comes down to our geometry. If we look at a room here, we just tied this here. You can see inside the room. It's basically a single mesh is what a room is consisting of. So that means that light can spill through, especially with radiosity. It can kind of break through. And we need to model some wall thickness to help stop the photons from breaking through this geometry. So let's see here. I modeled outer walls, and I put a black texture. Let's see here. I have the outer walls texture, so it's just the black, and I have the radiance set to 0, just so that obviously with the black, not much photons is gonna bounce around, but I just wanted to make sure and set the radiance to 0. All materials, when they're created, have a default radiance level. It's usually about 100, but you can adjust that setting if you ever have any issues with objects that are bouncing too much light around. You can reduce the radiance, and then the photon intensity will be dropped significantly. So we'll go here, and going to drop my outer walls onto my choreography. As you can see here, it's adding that external box to help stop the photons. The other thing I forgot to mention earlier is that I don't have any glass in this window. I just have these crossbars, and there's no objects obstructing this here, so that light can just pass through. If you do have glass, the photons might have a hard time entering the room. You can make the glass pane a separate object, and then you can control its rendering options here. You can turn off cast occlusion, cast shadows, but photons might have a hard time getting through. So I just did not include any glass pane. What I would be tempted to do is, if I did have a room and I did have some glass where I needed to reflect the interior, I would create a separate object, and then I would turn it off to cast the photons, and then I would probably do another pass with the reflecting glass material, and then render it as a separate layer, and then composite it in After Effects or Photoshop. But for this example, we just want the light to easily pass through this room. And now we have our outer walls. Let's go back to our camera, and then let's see what the photon solution is looking like. So as you can see, we're getting the light, we're getting some bounce. Definitely this area is not overblown. We're getting some appropriate bounce inside here. The only thing I want to check is this material of this window here. See. Window frame. White. Material. White. Let's see. Radiance. It's not set. Just double check, make sure it's set here. Okay, everything seems to be okay for the time being. So I wanted to show you a few examples of radiosity with photons and not using final gather. So here is a kitchen scene, and I have two light sources, the bulb light in the interior and an external light that's coming in. The bulb light it's scaled about the size of this object, so you're getting some soft shadows. You can see a bit of splotchiness from the photons. They could have been either more photons or more samples, but it's a fairly decent image, and we also can see some of the bounced light from the photon illumination that's casting on this wall here. And then here we have a single light source that's attached to this lamp. It's animated to flicker to illuminate, and all the photons are coming from this light source. So all of this side here is all bounced light from the photons. I actually I believe I have some like ambient occlusion, global illumination, just to help illuminate things a little bit more. But you can see there's a lot of this bounced light is from the photons. It's animating and changing intensity along with the lamp. The advantage is rendering radiosity with just the photons does tend to be a little bit faster than using the final gather. So it's nice to use with animations. Okay, so we can see here that it's another animation using photons. There is a little bit of flickering, but I'm sure if I was to increase the number of photons and the sampling, it would help reduce that. It's just using, again, a single spotlight, and then the light is bouncing up and animating the light bounces from underneath the tree onto the snow. It's also helping to create a soft lighting effect. There's no subsurface scattering or anything in the scene. Just the radiosity solution is helping soften things. Of course, there's also a slight bit of ambient lighting that's helping illuminate things. Okay, so let's continue with our radiosity. So we'll work on the final gathering solution. Let's see here. We'll just take a look see what happens when we turn final gather on. Okay, I'm just going to stop there. That took over a couple minutes to render. So this is what happens when we introduce final gathering, is that it's attempting to smooth the radiosity results, but it's increasing the render time dramatically. What we need to do is we need to go back and adjust our photon settings here. So I find you can reduce the photons cast when you have final gather on, because it's going to blend things together. So we can go back to 100,000 and try that, keeping our sample area the same and the photon samples, but the intensity, we can drop that a little bit. Let's see here, just try 200. Max bounces usually is 50 in the default, and that's pretty fine. If you increase the bounces, it would increase the brightness, but I find the default is pretty good. Final gather samples is okay to start at 100. The jittering, it can increase render times as well, but usually having, 25 to 100% will create more of a diffuse final gather lighting effect. Right now you can see it almost looks like it's creating a reflection. So it just created a mirror where the walls are. And once we increase the jittering, see, I'll start at 50, we'll see that it's going to soften the final gather results. Remembering as well, this is just a single pass. Out of 16 passes, it took over 2 minutes just to do one pass. So multiply that by 16 times. So we need to definitely try to adjust some settings to have a reasonable render time. So you can see here, the rendering time was reduced because I reduced the photons, and the result of the final gather, even though it's grainy, it's starting to become a little bit more diffuse and a little bit less just reflective. So I think what I need to do is I'm going to increase the jittering to 100%. Also, with every pass, it will smooth the noisiness of it. So I'm going to cancel that render. Increase to 100%. And also, it's important to turn on pre-compute irradiance. So if we had an animation where a character was walking through the scene, it would probably be best to keep it off because the light would be interacting with the object moving through the scene, or if the light was moving, for every frame you wanted to calculate the radiosity solution. But if we just have a static image or the camera is just moving through the scene, we can use pre-compute irradiance. And that means it calculates the radiosity solution once, it stores that, and then it just reuses that. So that will speed things up. I found it is especially important to have the outer wall, the thickness of the wall or the outer wall applied. Without it, you would definitely see artifacts happening. But since we have the outer wall, it should work fine. So it does take a while to render, but with pre-compute irradiance, it's taking only 30 seconds per pass, which is better than the 2 minutes per pass without it. So, but I think I'm going to make a few adjustments here. It looks like my main light source is very intense. It's blowing out a lot of things, but my illumination could do with some more brightness. So I'll cancel that. Let's see. I'll go to my light, maybe make it 164. Go back to my radiosity, intensity, try 300, 100,000. I'll try 50,000 just to help speed things up. Let's say I'll reduce that. Okay, let's see how this goes. Okay, so that's taken about 6 minutes to render that. So definitely we can use with more final gather sampling. And I could see what's happening is we're starting to get some artifacts. It's the most apparent in this window frame here, even on the chair a little bit and along the baseboards. Okay, so let's adjust a few more settings here. So let's make the intensity 400. Let's give it the maximum samples of 500. And pre-compute radiance on. Let's just take one last look. at this. Okay, I'm going to stop the render there. We can see things are starting to look better. Obviously, it only rendered about half the passes, so it's kind of noisy. But there's another issue to bring up here, is that, so we have a single light source. It's illuminating, inside our room here, bouncing around. But in reality, when you have light entering a room, there's two lights that are illuminating your scene. There's the light of the sun, and there's the diffused light from the sky. That should be illuminating more of these walls and then contributing to this global illumination. So in this sense, an animation master, again, it's not completely based on physical reality. We have to use some artistic judgment to help enhance the scene. So we use ambient lighting. So we can use this global ambience type. And what we do is we just use the color of the sky as our global ambience color, and then we add some ambience occlusion. So let's see here, I think 64 is pretty good. We have to make sure we go to our camera and that we enable our global ambience occlusion. And just setting it to the default of 30% is fine for now. If we find that it's kind of noisy, we want to smooth things out, we can increase those samplings. But for now, let's just use the default. So let's take a look at this here. Okay, I'm just going to stop that there. So as you can see, we're getting our global illumination effect, ambient occlusion. So we're getting our direct light from the sun, and then we're getting some diffused light, which is illuminating. It's kind of spilling out from this window and hitting the sides here, and creating some more ambient light, instead of just relying on the photons or the final gather. Some of the ambience is helping fill in those details. So let's see here. So there's another thing I want to touch up on here, is the blue plastic. So this is pretty solid. I would like to get a little bit of translucency shining through. So let's see here, maybe about 24%, and just do a little preview render this area here. So we gotta calculate the radiosity again, and getting some, maybe I'll brighten it up a little bit more. Oops. Translucency, make it 42. Okay, so we're getting a nice translucency effect. You can see even the crossbar shadow on the back of the chair. And it's softening up with every pass, just as the shadows on the walls are. The translucency effect of the shadow is softening up. So that's a nice effect. So I wanted to show a few demonstrations of radiosity using final gather in animation. So this is a rotation of Lucky. And yeah, the final gather helps smooth things out. So a little bit less flickering in the animation because it's smoothing out the photons. And I find the final gather layer of interest as far as shading is concerned. The only drawback is that in this particular instance, the highlights were blowing things out. So I rendered things in a few passes. So I rendered a diffuse pass and a specular pass for the character. And for the eyes, you can see the highlights here. I rendered those separately. And then I composited those in After Effects. So those are issues I wouldn't have if I just rendered it with Photons and Radiosity. Final Gather does introduce a whole new element to the rendering, but you get some visual interest for it, and it smooths things out. And then here's a scene from an animation. The lighting is pretty dark, but I did use Final Gather within this Radiosity just to get a little bit more visual interest. You can't really tell, but there is slight secondary bounces, some visual interest, and then of course everything is composited. I rendered out to separate layers, again like a beauty pass, and then reflection pass, specular pass, and then I composited it all together. But I like the look I get from Radiosity with Final Gather. It does give it a nice look to things. Okay, so we're getting close to wrapping things up. I think one of the last things I want to do is actually create a plane that's going to be on the outside of this window. So I'll just go over here. I'll just create a new object here. Just okay, should be good enough here. Just going to use this as our light. And see here, create a new material. Just make sure it's white. And give it some more ambience. Give it some glow. Make sure it's off. Go and put this in our scene. Okay. I want to make sure that it's okay. Make sure this thing doesn't cast any shadows. Off. And no occlusion. Okay, so we can see it here. Scale it up to fit in this window. And let's see, we do a test render. Let's see what our glow radius is 15, intensity 200. Let's see, I'll drop that down to 100. And Let's see what we get here. Okay, going to increase it back to 200, only 250, maybe, increase the glow radius. Okay, I think I want to make sure that this object is outside of the cone of light. Let's see here, move this back here. Okay, it's well out of the effect of the fog light, but still visible. Whoa. Okay, it's a little bit too much, but definitely the volumetric light was having an effect on the visibility of the glow, and because it's out of range, now the glow is really having an effect. So we just need to go back here and reduce down the intensity. Let's try a lower value. Okay, so we're starting to get the effect we're after. Just a little bit of glow from the window and the bright light. I think I'm going to go to my light here, add to custom. I'm going to change my outside light to be similar to the light. Okay, and I notice part of this outer wall, this part here, this corner is visible from the inside. So I'm going to kind of close this down here. I'm going to open up my outer wall, go view and tile vertically. Okay. So I'm back in my camera view. And it's nice to be able to work in a model view and then see it update in real time in the camera view. So I want to take this line here, which is that edge there that's showing up in the render, and I just want to push it over. You can kind of see it there in my camera view. There was a slice of that outside wall that's showing through. I just want to tuck it away so it's not so visible. So let's do another render of that. Okay, so things are looking good. So what I'm going to do now, cancel that. I'm going to set up a render, and then I'll show you how I modify the final render in Photoshop or After Effects. So just go to our settings here, make sure everything's the way we want it. Reflections, ambient occlusion, output format. We're going to change this to OpenEXR. I like to use the OpenEXR because I get 32-bit data, which it gives me a lot more color and image depth that I can manipulate. If it was an 8-bit image and I wanted to overexpose some elements, you would start to get banding in the image. But if you output a 32-bit image, you have a lot more data that you can expose or make adjustments in Photoshop without banding artifacts happening. I'll just save this to my desktop. Here, make sure to set your custom range if you're just rendering an image and everything was done on frame 1. Make sure that it only renders frame 1. And then my resolution, buffers. I find there's not many times that I need the alpha, especially in this case here. I'm just happy to have a flat image without an alpha. And then I'll just render. Okay, so our render is finished. Take a look at it here. And things are looking pretty good. The only thing is there's a bit of noise. We could increase our ambient occlusion sampling to smooth that out a little bit. But the area of concern is this windowsill. It looks like there's some of the photons for the final gather is having an effect, and it's creating a bit of a noisy solution. So what I've done is I've gone back to my settings. I've been trying a few things out. I actually reduced some of my photons just to try a few things. I reduced my sample area. Let's see here. One thing I did as well, I increased my intensity of the light and then reduced the intensity of the photons. I reduced the samples a little bit to 256, but these are not necessarily what I want to change. I think what is going to help to reduce the noise is to actually change the properties on the material. So on this windowsill here, I have this white material. And what I'm going to do is the radiance is set at the default 100. I'm going to change that to 0. And because there's not going to be much radiance interacting with this, I'm going to use some ambience intensity to reintroduce some light back into it. And I have a seal. It's just like a slightly different material. I'll just make sure that I have some ambience on that. I'm going to reduce the radiance to 0 as well. So let's see here. We'll take a look at it. Do a preview render. So it's calculating radiosity pretty quickly. Yeah, so things are looking pretty good. So we're not getting as much noise like the photons in the final gather was creating some unusual noise. This is just the ambient occlusion noise. And then we reintroduced some ambient lighting. It just kind of looks like it has a nice flat white paint job on it. So that's the thing about working with lighting and animation master, is that sometimes you need to adjust your materials to work with your lighting, and you need to use ambient lighting once in a while to help brighten things. So, okay, so I'm going to cancel this. And we're going to set up a render to compare to the previous one. So we have our second render. Let's take a peek here. Yeah, things are looking much better. So I did drop down my photons, and you're starting to see a little bit of some of the photon numbers are kind of breaking up. So I could definitely put that back to 500,000, and then it would be much smoother. But considering it's not too bad. And then, yeah, I'm much happier with this windowsill by reducing the radiance, by taking it away, and then just introducing ambience. That looks a lot better. And basically what I'm looking for is a smooth image so that I can create an animation like a flyby or a fly-through with the camera. And it's not going to be flickering, and it's not going to look jagged. So let me show you how I work with the image in Photoshop. Open this here. Okay, so what we need is an adjustment layer. We can go to exposure and gamma correction, put that to 0.5, and then that puts our image back to the way that we're used to seeing it. So here, Control E, just merge those together. Camera raw, and then I like using camera raw when making adjustments to my photos because it has all these settings here. I can adjust my exposure, my contrast. Usually I go through here. Sometimes, as I did here, I try the auto setting. If I don't like that, I turn it off and just adjust things by eye. So that's here. Edit warmth, some vibrance, saturation. The effects are really good. Use this a lot if you want to add some more of sharpness and visual interest. And vignette, definitely. It's a good feature to introduce. It kind of simulates the look of film camera by adding that vignette. And see here, detail. If you still have some noise from the ambient occlusion, you can use some noise reduction. That will help smooth things out. Sharpened. So go back and forth. So that's imported just from the render, and then with a bit of Photoshop enhancements. When it comes to creating an animation, it's really important, especially for this type of animation where you have the camera fly through, to have the pre-compute irradiance, because for every frame that will speed things up. Yeah, so I rendered my animation. I used the net render settings. So even if the frame, I think it took me about over an hour per frame. Go new and job. See here. So it was quiet here. This was the scene that I created for my animation. So I had my OpenEXR. It's really important to find when you're using the net render. To say I go to my renders. See here. To lead share. Make sure there's no backslash before the file name. Otherwise, they'll just be dumping them all onto your main drive. So with that, sometimes it adds that. Make sure you have your range set. Buffers, no alpha. Go next. So I have my multipath settings. I always double check all my settings here. Ambient occlusion. My reflections, 1, soft, 20. Okay, I go finish. And then, so I have my job waiting to start. And then the render messenger, I just add all my render nodes, the different CPUs I have here. So I can add up to 15. So, depends on how much I want to push my computer. Sometimes I just add 12, and then I could still go on and use my computer and do other stuff. Sometimes I want to have it rendering 15 nodes. And then when you want it to start, just shift select all your nodes and drag it there. And then it will start activating your renders. So this is where it's great if you're rendering animations with Animation Master. It can take a while to render, but if you have net render, it can save you a lot of time. So thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching this tutorial. I hope that it was informative and that you learned something. And feel free to leave likes and comments and subscribe to my channel. Thanks again.